Good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday morning. It's a little chilly and we're in the shade, but that's lovely. We can talk about what this tree is doing for us here in the community. And I'd just love to know how many of you are new to permaculture, like really don't know what. So most of you are. Okay, so raise your hand if you're like, I'm familiar with permaculture, I know what's happening, I'm practicing. All right, sort of, kind of. Okay, so do you want a little quickie intro on permaculture before we get into stuff? Okay, so here's my thing. I really like to go into details about a lot of things, and I have now only 45 minutes. So I'm going to try to keep myself moving along. I have a lot of points I want to hit about how important this work is and the impact that we can actually have on a local level on global climate with our shovels and not have to wait for all of the governments to get together and sign agreements and agree to reduce their carbon emissions. But there are things that we can do as communities to really try to bring some more stability to what's happening on the planet. So that is the big message that I want to bring today, and I'll try to get all my salient points in without talking so terribly fast. So, okay, I do like to talk fast, so. All right, so here's your quickie intro to permaculture. So permaculture is a design system based on connections and relationships. And it was founded by, or the idea was put forth by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in the 70s. And they were both Australian. David Holmgren was quite a bit younger. Bill Mollison was the older. They met in Tasmania in some university setting, and their joint conclusion about the problem with academia was that it was all very compartmentalized, and that people really needed to be thinking more interdisciplinarily and really looking at relationships and how actions interacted with other fields instead of staying so isolated. And as their model, they really saw the forest as the epitome of this system where things are all connected. I mean, if you think about it for a moment, the forest doesn't need to go to the nursery and buy any mulch or any plants or bring in anything. The forest does not need to have anything hauled away in bags on the curb or taken to the dump or anything like that. The forest is really a self-sustaining system where it provides for itself everything it needs, and it utilizes everything that is given to it through the rain and the sun, and it enhances those cycles and moves them forward, so that forests are really responsible for why we have moisture and more vegetation further inland on the continents. So I'll try to get into just the right amount of detail here, but so these were the first pieces of permaculture here, the permaculture ethics. And now there's a lot of design systems like ecological landscape design and things like that that are really very similarly related to the connections and the resilience and the self-sustaining nature of ecological communities. But permaculture really puts it in terms of ethics. Like, what are we doing here? We are here to take care of the earth, to repair, conserve, and regenerate. We're here to take care of people. We cannot have a healthy planet if we don't have healthy people, and we can't have healthy people if we don't have a healthy planet. So this people care piece is really important. To seek peace, to guard human rights everywhere, to love everybody's children, no matter what political persuasion they have or what country they live in or how many resources they use, but just that we all love and respect each other, and that we see each other and honor each other from where we are right now, that there's no judgment about what pesticide you used on your yard last week, because today is a different day and you can make a different choice. And as we become more literate in the way that ecosystems work and the way that our planets work, that people are going to make the right decisions, because we all want to be here. We all want our children to have a beautiful, healthy place to live. And then the third ethic is fair share. Invest all capital, intelligence, goodwill, and labor to these ends, to this people care and earth care. So this is our mission right now on the planet, getting more and more important every day. So these are the basic permaculture ethics. Permaculture also has a set of principles. I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically you can see if you work with nature, not against, make the least change for the greatest effect, everything gardens. Then there's these indicators of sustainability, which are drawn from natural systems, intact ecosystems where things are self-sustaining and supplying their own needs. And these are super fun. You could spend days just kind of diving into this. But if this is new for you, just look up Permaculture Principles, and there's some great videos you can watch, people talking about each principle in detail. Eric Olson, who lives in Sebastopol, he does some great videos in particular if you want to go deeper with these principles. but they're basically filters for decision making. Oh, I have this idea, I want to do this thing in my yard, or I want to do this thing on my land. Is this an ecologically responsible thing to do? I'm not sure. Let me check in with these principles. So that's really what they're for. And the hope is that as human beings become more engaged in community, become more engaged with their planet, there's only one, and then we come into periods of stress or crisis or emergency, that the default, the place where we fall back into are these principles. Is this earth care, people care, fair share. Not the panic, not the, oh, I have to have enough for me, I can't let anybody else in, you know, I have to protect mine. But no, we're stronger together, that when we are interconnected and we're helping each other, that we actually do have more security, more resources, and more resiliency. So permaculture helps me get up in the morning. You know, after listening to the news, sometimes I just have to come back to the ethics and the principles to really restore my sense of well-being in the world. So that was your quick and dirty on permaculture. And now I just really want to dive into the piece with trees and climate. And I want to just bring to your attention all of the things that trees actually are doing, engaging with, the services that they're performing. So there's this new, not so new phrase, ecosystem functions, right? Like, this is why we should preserve nature, because it's of the ecosystem functions that it's performing, right? And or ecosystem services. Yeah, that's a useful phrase, you know, and it has, you can easily bring economics into that, and you can say, oh, we're saving a lot of money because we're preserving these ecosystem services by maintaining this forest cover or this vegetation or by replanting, etc. And it feels a little dry to me, ecosystem services, because really when you start doing this work, what you'll notice is this sense of love that you feel in your heart for your plants and your land and your soil organisms, right? And it's not like, oh, today I worked on restoring ecosystem services. Well, you did, and you brought this joy into your heart. And the most amazing thing about this work, and I've been in permaculture now for at least 15 years, is that when you start working in the earth with this intention, that she responds, that you do a little something, you create the conditions for life, and life comes and just like takes off for you. And so you feel really seen and rewarded and responded to by this beautiful planet that we live on. So it's very, very exciting. But back to some detail here on, I'll just move this over, on how a tree interacts with rain. So some of our major issues right now on the planet, the change in our weather patterns, places that are totally going dry, no rain at all, other places way too much rain, lots of flooding, a lot of deforestation, a lot of soil erosion, sedimentation into our natural waterways. Ooh, got some mulch in there, that's all right. Never had a good presentation without a little mulch in it. And sedimentation in our natural waterways, and then these changes in weather patterns, so that we can't predict anymore when to plant our crops, when they're going to be harvested, when, you know, which trees are going to thrive. We're losing this sense of security in these climatic patterns that we've counted on for generations. So to understand how we have participated in those changes is really important. And it's not just that we've been burning fossil fuels for 100, 200 years. It's that our land management practices have become so widespread and so damaging that that is what's really changing our climatic patterns and our rain patterns more significantly, I believe, than how much carbon is in the atmosphere. So tracking carbon in the atmosphere is doable. Scientists can measure how much it is. They can correlate climate patterns and temperature rises with the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They have all of their little tools, and they can get together and argue about it. And yeah, it does seem to be correlating with a lot of the issues that we have. But is it the deciding factor? And is that the only way to fix what's happening, is to reduce the carbon out of the atmosphere? So I don't think so. And a lot of other people who've been working in reforestation and rehydration and tracking some of these patterns and watching what happens when we restore certain ecosystem services are really, we're becoming convinced that this is more impactful than trying to deal with carbon dioxide. And I mean, getting everybody to agree on reducing emissions while at the same time we're all still exploring and trying to get more natural gas and more oil out of the earth so that we can burn more. It seems like I'm just ready to be done with that whole part of it and just get my shovel out and talk to good people and plant trees and swales and all of that stuff. So how does a tree interact with rain? In so many different ways. So first of all, when water is falling from the sky, it's falling really fast and hard, and it can cause a lot of damage to bare soil. So when raindrops hit the canopy of a tree, like if it were raining right now and we were all underneath here, it would be quite some time before we got wet, because the drops that would be landing on the leaves and the tree would be getting wet first. And so it's taking in all of that. It's like getting wet itself, and then the energy of those raindrops is being absorbed by the motion of the little leaves and the branchlets as they move in response to being hit. And so by the time the drops fall down here, they're just falling very gently. So the canopy absorbs this kinetic energy. The canopy also sort of fertilizes this water as it falls through. So nutrients and bug poop and dust and pollen and fungi spores and bacteria and all kinds of things, they come into the rain and they dribble on down. Then the moisture is kind of directed by the tree. So in some ways it's directed towards the center and it soaks in around the trunk. And then in the other channel, it comes off the canopy. And so you have this wetter zone around the canopy and this wetter zone around the trunk. And so the tree is really channeling water to its own deep stability feeder roots, its drinking roots that are more in the center, and then out to its more shallow feeder roots that are taking up nutrients around the perimeter. So the tree is actually placing water in different places where it needs it. Underneath the tree, you have this massive layer of organic matter that fell from the tree, that the leaves fell down and they were left. So leaves, you're supposed to leave them. That's why they're called leaves. And they feed the tree. And so we have this obsession. So here's another piece of how I think we all need to collectively shift, is that we have to let go a little bit of this tidy aesthetic that we're really attached to, where we rake everything up and we make it look really neat. And it's okay to keep the leaves in a pile over here or in a compost bin or something, and then after they've decomposed then we can use them. But we don't like things to be all over the ground, and we don't like things all growing into each other, and we just have to let that go. Let's be free, let's be wild, let's embrace like piles of organic matter on the ground, because that is what the planet really needs. And these are like stores of food. It's like your pantry. This is the tree's pantry right here, all of the leaves that fall down on the ground. So let's leave them, because they become this litter layer that starts to decompose and become this really rich humus. And all these leaves that fall down, they're feeding the soil microorganisms. The soil microorganisms are what's feeding the plants. So we have this persistent misunderstanding that we can feed plants, but all we can do is feed the soil. The soil supports the microorganisms, and the microorganisms feed the plants. So it's like our own digestive tracts, right? We think we're feeding ourselves when we eat, but we're actually feeding our digestive microflora, and then they feed us. So like little mental shift. And you can understand that and still go to the nursery and buy fertilizer and come back and like feed your plants. And so it really is a bigger paradigm shift than you would think, like to just turn everything in your head. So once we are feeding through leaving our leaves, this vast network of life that's happening under the soil, and these organisms, they're breaking down minerals, they're recycling nutrients, they're holding water, they're changing the structure and the texture of the soil by creating these aggregates that hold the soil together in a particular way, leaving space for air to move in and air to move out. Oxygen has to get into the soil. These soil microorganisms breathe air, and they exhale carbon dioxide, and so carbon dioxide has to come back out of the soil. And as these organisms are in there and they're moving and they're reproducing and they're dying, their bodies are creating these pore spaces in the soil. They're pushing through, they secrete stuff, so they don't get scratched by the little mineral fragments, so they're leaving these like sticky residues that hold the soil particles together. So it's this beautiful spongy thing going on in there, and it's all holding onto carbon. So the tree is photosynthesizing, and then it actually secretes carbohydrates and sugars out of its roots. Those feed the soil microorganisms, these simple carbohydrate compounds, and then the soil microorganisms give back nutrients that they've recycled or made bioavailable through digesting mineral particles. So it's this really lovely thing. And now Some people are starting to call this whole business the soil carbon sponge, because the trees can take the carbon out of the atmosphere and pump it into the soil, and the soil microbes can hold onto it and recycle it. And if you have really healthy intact soil where you're not scraping everything away all the time and leaving it bare, that carbon is being sequestered long term in the soil. So we can use our plants to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soil, which is where a lot of it started from, right? So other really amazing things that the tree is helping us with is this way that it condenses water vapor out of the air. So this is super critical. A lot of moist air is moving through our communities, especially here on the coast. The air over the ocean heats up, water molecules evaporate. That moisture-laden air then blows inland. As it passes through the canopy of a tree, it condenses on these cool, thin surfaces of the leaves. So water vapor that was in the air that we couldn't see, that we weren't measuring as precipitation, it condenses on the leaves, so it goes from its gas form back into its liquid form, and then it drips down onto the ground. It's never measured as precipitation because it was just condensation of moist air. So the tree is actually harvesting moisture out of the air and turning it into liquid, which it then feeds to itself, right? So now this liquid water goes down into this soil carbon sponge, taken up into the bodies of all these soil microorganisms, held by the soil microorganisms, held by fungi, bacteria, all these little tiny arthropods, these little shredders that break things up into smaller pieces, nematodes and protozoa, and everybody's in there. They're like eating and moving and dying and eating and moving and reproducing and dying. And then this water is taken back up by the tree, moved through the body of the tree, and then released through the leaves back up into the atmosphere. So this process is called transpiration. It's a little bit like breathing because the tree is releasing a vapor. But so if you've forgotten your middle school photosynthesis, I'll just give you the quickie. So when the sun shines on the leaf is able to take that energy using its chloroplasts, and it takes water that it's drunk out of the soil and the carbon dioxide that it's taking in through its leaves, through pores in its leaves called stomata, and the water and the carbon dioxide and the energy of the sun are what allows the plant to make these long carbon chains, these sugars and carbohydrates, then turns those into its leaves and its bark or its fruit, things that we eat, and it secretes those out of its roots to feed the soil microorganisms like I mentioned before. So in order for the tree to be taking in the carbon dioxide, it has to open up the little pores on the underside of its leaves. So they're like little holes under here called stomata. And the tree can actually control whether those pores are opened or closed. So when it's super windy or too hot, the tree doesn't want to dehydrate, closes up its pores, and it stops photosynthesizing. It's like, I can't right now because if I open up to take in carbon dioxide, I'm going to lose a lot of water. But when conditions are good, or the tree has various adaptations to live in a really hot, dry climate, like furry leaves or waxy leaves or all these things we see on plants that are better in more extreme climates, then it opens its pores, it takes in the carbon dioxide, and it releases oxygen and water vapor as its sort of byproduct, right? So now it's water vapor leaving the tree, going back up into the atmosphere. So the tree roots were able to extract liquid water out of the soil in various levels, the topsoil layer, and then deeper and deeper, and then some of these super deep roots that go way down into the subsoil, drinks it up and releases it as vapor. So now another thing you may not remember from middle school or high school chemistry or physics is that in order to change liquid water into water vapor, an enormous amount of energy is required. This phase shift from liquid to vapor requires energy. So the energy from the sun is what's allowing this tree to create this phase shift. And then that heat that would have been, like, imagine we were just on a black parking lot or something, that heat from the sun that we would be feeling as sensible heat, it's actually been utilized by the tree to convert liquid water into water vapor. And so we don't feel that sensible heat, right? So what is the problem we're having on this planet right now? Too much heat, too much heat. But here we have these magical beings that transform that heat by transferring liquid water into water vapor and sending it up, and it goes up into the atmosphere, and then way up there it recondenses from vapor back into liquid, and then it releases that sensible heat, but it's off the surface. It's way out there in the atmosphere where it can be dissipated back into outer space, right? So the tree is actually not just shading us, but physically transforming the sensible heat into water vapor. Everybody with me so far? So this is pretty miraculous. So there's the condensation of the moisture just on the surface, dripping down, being drunk up, and then this transfer of sensible heat into water vapor through this evapotranspiration process. And so that trees become these amazing moderators of climate. They make everything more stable. So if you had really dry air, the tree's going to make it moister. If you have really wet air, the tree's going to make it drier. If it was too hot, the tree cools it. If it was too cold, the tree warms it. Like, they just are these amazing moderators. So already you can see how, pardon me, quick nose blow. How essential these beings are. Like, we really need more trees, right? So how can we participate in this in a more conscious and encouraging way? Like, how do we get more of this action on the planet, right? Because, okay, the trees cool things down, the trees increase rain, they cycle water, they take it in, they release it up, it moves further inland, it gets condensed on more trees, it falls down, it gets cycled up, it moves further inland, it gets condensed on more trees, right? So we're actually moving water vapor inland. We're stabilizing not just this immediate area, but a much larger area through the presence of trees. And the deforestation that we've done as humans on so many of our continents is really more responsible for drought than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, in my opinion, and according to a lot of other people that I have been reading. So just one quick resource for you. I have so many people that I could recommend you to, but if you wanted to get into some of this stuff, this book, Water in Plain Sight, Hope for a Thirsty World by Judith Schwartz. She's one of these new science journalists who gets a little bug and wants to write about something and then goes and visits all people who are working on this idea or this concept. And so she's been all over the world talking to people who are working on these water issues. And so really, if you check out this book, you will get the names of a lot of other groups and individuals who are working in this way. Thanks, Jackson. And then you can dive deeper into some of this stuff. But I want to go more into the swales because the swales in conjunction with trees is how we can really jumpstart the regeneration of these cycles. It's very difficult when we've deforested. Then in a very short amount of time, we lose the soil, we lose the water that the soil was holding, we lose that whole community of soil microbes that we're cycling and keeping everything going. And then how do you get trees to grow there again, right? You've kind of destroyed the conditions that were supporting the trees. So what David was saying about swales, it's a fancy trench, but it's a fancy trench that is the foundation of restoring a whole bunch of these ecosystem services via bringing the life back, bringing the trees back. So a swale is a ditch, yes, but it's a very special kind of ditch. It's a ditch that's totally level. So if you were to look at a contour map, you guys are reasonably familiar with contour maps, yeah? So you see all those little lines, the topographic lines on the contour map. Each one of them is marking level, so the same height above sea level. So if you were to walk on a contour line on a topographic map, you wouldn't be going uphill or downhill, you would just be walking flat level. So what we want to do when we dig a swale is we basically want to create a flat level trench. So the bottom of the trench is flat and level. Everything we take out of the trench, we pile up on the downhill side, making a nice gentle low berm. The top of that berm is flat and level. Then any water that comes down the slope gets caught in that trench, gets the opportunity to infiltrate, and is held there for long enough that it can soak in. Because once we've devegetated and we lose that soil life, the soil stops being able to really receive water. And this is a massive problem. This is why our landscapes are dehydrating to such a great extent, because it's not just pavement and roads and houses and parking lots and all of that. It's the actual soil that has been degraded that can no longer receive water. And so then when rain falls, it's just all on the surface. We put it into pipes, we get it back into the waterways or the oceans as fast as we can, because it's become a nuisance, because it can't soak in. So the swale is a way for us to say to the earth, hey, so sorry about the abuse. I know it's hard for you to drink the water now, but I'm going to make you this nice trench, and because it's level, the water's not flowing, it's not going one way or another, it just is sitting, and then the earth is finally like, okay, now I have time, I have time to drink this in. Plus, as you dig the swale, you're able to penetrate through some of these impermeable layers that we create with our compaction, a lot of repeated tilling, a lot of heavy driving, heavy animals. These will all crush those pore spaces out of the soil and make it so that it can't take water in anymore. And this is like our big prescription for how to solve that. So here's just a cartoon of a hilltop illustrating that a swale is on a level line. So if you're standing up here and this is your place and it's raining, you would see this little skinny trench fill up with water during a heavy storm and then drain as the earth takes it in. And so here's a side view. So here's the trench right here, and the soil was dug out and it was piled up on the berm right here. And if you're in the back and you can't see, please feel free to come forward. You could, you know, sit on the ground or whatever if you want to see. Over time, the water that comes into the swale and soaks into the earth then builds up this lens of saturated soil in the ground. And this gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. So the first year, maybe, you know, the soil's just starting to be able to absorb. Maybe you don't really have that much of a lens. Second year, oh, now the soil organisms have come in. They're really feeding off of this water. They're feeding off of the organic matter that you've put in the swale. They're starting to transform the soil. There's pore space, etc. This saturated lens gets bigger. And then by the third year, there's really like a super noticeable change, this kind of pop. And if you've, you know, worked in the earth before, you'll notice if there is this sort of magical 3-year thing. You know, you start adding mulch. Oh, after 3 years, whoa, something crazy happens. So anyway, and then this increases over time so that you actually have enough moisture in the soil through August, through September, through October, where trees are still able to access this moisture and maintain their growth and keep photosynthesizing and keep doing their thing. And this is really enhanced by planting trees on these berms. So now the tree is not in the bottom of the swale, it's not underwater all winter long, it's not in a super saturated zone, it's up on the berm, it can breathe, its roots want air, but it can access this zone of saturated soil with its roots. So this is a really beautiful and effective system for restoring the earth's ability to take in the water and then planting the trees that are going to drink that water and begin this cycling process, or begin restoring it. Let me just check my time. Okay. Any questions so far? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You're second. Yeah.
How long will water sit in a swale? Do you have problems with standing water and mosquitoes and things like that?
So it totally depends on your soil type. Oh yeah. So he asked, how long does the water sit in the swale? And are there problems with standing water and mosquitoes? So it totally depends on what kind of soil you have and how damaged it is. So a lot of heavy clay soils, yes, there will be standing water in there for a while. And what I do in that case is I make sure that the swale is filled with organic matter, and I use a lot of wood chips for that. If you're working on a really broad landscape, it's not always practical to fill the whole thing with wood chips. But then usually in that case, if it's full of standing water, you know, it's not so much in a residential area, you know, it's more out in the open, and then other organisms come and they find that with those mosquitoes, and they're like, you know, setting up a little ecosystem right there. So yes, usually I fill them with organic matter, and then often the soil type will just be able to drink it in. And as the swale evolves over those 3 years, the clay becomes more porous as those soil organisms do their thing, and then the water drains faster, or is infiltrated faster. Your question in the back.
Yeah, the level in the swale, does that require surveying equipment or something? Or
No. Okay, so the question was, how do you get the swale's level? Does it require surveying equipment? So, no, it doesn't. You just need a simple tool you can make yourself called an A-frame level. And David mentioned one. Yes. And is there one that you can show anybody later, David? Or sorry to catch you with your mouth full. Wrong moment. Okay, he says there might be one at one of the food forests later this afternoon. But essentially, it's a tool you can make yourself in 20 minutes. It looks like an A, and you calibrate it so that you, through a little technique, you make a mark on this crossbar of the A, and then you put a string with a heavy weight, and when the 2 feet of the A are level, your string will hang right across this mark on your crossbar. Easy money, yeah. So in my permaculture classes, we show people how to make them with sticks and baling twine and a chunk of rock, and then, you know, for my professional image, I got some 1x2 lumber and some bolts and wing nuts, and I made a fancy one, you know, but yeah, they're so easy and really intuitive. And my understanding is that that was designed or invented by the Egyptians in order to dig level ditches that would bring water from the Nile and the Euphrates to flood irrigate their fields. So that's my understanding of their origin. But let's get now a little more detail on the food forests and the tree guilds and how we can bring these into our backyards. Unless, did you have another question? No? Okay. Okay, so let's see. So again, if you want to see better, feel free to just get up and come be closer to the front here. There's some detail on here, but you can also just get the gist from wherever you're standing or sitting, I'm sure. So fruit tree gilding, this concept of the guild, this goes back to the relationships, the focus on connections and relationships in permaculture. And hopefully you already have gotten the sense, like, wow, there are a lot of relationships, like the relationship between the soil organisms and the plant roots, and between the tree and the atmosphere, and between forest and the climate in general, and how it's all really so tightly tied. And like, oh, our agricultural practices, our building practices, our industry, like all these things that we've been doing that are changing the way that the land is able to function. These are changing the way that our climatic patterns are functioning as well. And it's interesting now, in the book that I mentioned, there are examples of people like ranchers in North Dakota who have embraced this no-till agriculture, where we're encouraging people to stop leaving this bare soil and coming through with tractors and digging everything up year after year, sometimes multiple times a year, because that's destroying all of these soil organisms, and how they just keep trying to set themselves up so they can feed the plants and protect the soil. And we just keep coming in and ripping them up. When we rip them up like that, we destroy that structure where they were like all these different sized particles of soil stuck together by the gooey secretions from the plants and from the microorganisms. We separate all of those, and then the little tiny particles, being now separate, they filter down through the larger particles, and they'll settle at the layer that they can't get through anymore, so they settle. They actually form this really tight, impermeable layer where there's no more pore space, right? So as we do all of this mixing of the earth, which we've convinced ourselves for generations is essential to the growing of healthy crops, we're actually creating these hard pans, these impermeable layers. We're destroying the soil life, and then we're exposing all the soil and letting it then be blown away and washed away by wind and water. So this idea of fruit tree gilding is just like, it's another example of these relationships. We have to have all these relationships to hold everything together, to keep it all functioning in its intact way, so that we can have the ecosystem services that we require to continue living successfully on this planet. So a fruit tree guild involves the fruit tree as your sort of central feature, and then around it, it has its whole network of support. So this is a little community for the fruit tree. And now in permaculture, we talk about various specific players and the roles that they're performing in the fruit tree guild. So we have mulch plants. So mulch plants, for example, we have comfrey, artichoke, fava beans, nasturtiums, milk thistle, mullein, things that have a robust leafy matter, and they're just like making a lot of biomass, drinking the water, using the sunlight, and just making a lot of stuff, right? And so now that stuff will eventually kind of die and fall off the plant by itself, or a little animal can come by and eat it, or you can come by with your clippers or your little hand scythe, and you just chop off some of those lower leaves and you just leave them on the ground. So again, we're not tidying everything up, we're putting it back on the ground. If you want it to look pretty, you know, then you can put like some, you know, more fine looking mulch on top of it, but really we need to leave the stuff on the ground, because that's protecting the soil and feeding the soil organisms. So those are our mulch plants. And now a lot of plants are in multiple categories, so I'll talk about that too. So then we have our nitrogen fixers. So this is remarkable. Raise your hand if you've heard of nitrogen fixers, or you know what they are. Oh, good, excellent. So, quickie review, if you haven't heard of them, nitrogen fixers are plants that have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that live in the soil. And the bacteria are able to convert the nitrogen from the air, which the plants cannot use directly. These bacteria are able to convert that nitrogen into other forms like ammonia and nitrates and things that the plants can use directly. So again, we can't feed the plants the nitrogen from the air, but the soil organisms can take the nitrogen from the air and they can feed the plants. Our job is to feed the soil, and the soil will feed the plants. So these nitrogen fixers basically pulling nitrogen out of thin air and feeding the plants with it, and they amass all this nitrogen, and it's in their roots. They have little nodules that you can actually see if you pull up a fava bean and you look at its roots. They're little sort of pinkish white nodules. They taste a little bit like peanut butter, in my opinion. And they build up this mass, and then they're able to have a lot more nitrogen in their flesh. And so then if you came and you chopped those, like you were double stacking with a nitrogen fixer and a mulch plant, you chop that, you leave it on the surface, now all that nitrogen is available in the topsoil. If an animal comes and eats that, they're getting that nitrogen to build their bodies, and then they poop out what's left over, and now that poop is available to other plants in the soil. And when somebody bites or cuts off the top of a nitrogen fixer, there's a corresponding sloughing of roots off that happens in the soil, roots that have those nodules that are full of nitrogen, and again, that nitrogen is made available. Yeah?
So you're talking so fast. The part
I know,
that I know,
sorry.
it fixes nitrogen and there's nodules and stuff, but then, like, say if I overwintered my vegetable garden with some of these things, then do you need to chop it up and put it in the soil, or does it already go from the roots into the soil?
Okay,
That's what you went over really fast.
Right, so the question is how do I best get the nitrogen into the soil from these plants? So there's a lot of different vehicles for that. So the top growth can be composted or mulched in place. And when you cut off the top growth, then some of the roots that have those nodules on them are also then, they die. Basically their top growth connection is gone. And so then they're just available to the soil organisms that come and start eating them and digesting them and distribute that nitrogen. And then you can also just like flatten the stuff down and sheet mulch over it, cardboard, wood chips, straw, then the soil organisms come and consume. I mean, it's basically any way that you can get that, any part of that plant to a soil organism, it will be incorporated into the soil, into the topsoil, and held in the bodies of those organisms, and then made available to the plants. So you have lots of options. And you'll hear people say, well, as soon as your fava beans are 30% flowering, you have to chop them up and dig them in, or you've lost all the nitrogen. There's so many ways to do it, right? It's like, how many ways are there to roast a chicken? You know, I mean, so I try not to get caught in dogma, and I just encourage people, like, experiment. Okay, your fava beans went to seed. That just means more of the nitrogen is in the seeds now. It's not as much in the leafy bits, it's not as much in the roots, now it's in the seeds. So now your choices are eat the seeds, yum, or chop them down, lay them on the ground, mulch over them, let them decompose, put them in your compost, feed them to your chickens or your cows or your pigs. So you have lots of options. Okay, so moving on, I actually want to do nutrient accumulators next down here because they go nicely with the nitrogen fixers and the mulch plants. Nutrient accumulators, a lot of them have these deep tap roots. We call them spike roots. Some of these are like worst weeds, thistles, right? Oh, prickly. Yeah, prickly is hard, but they are working. They are doing so much for us. They penetrate super compacted soil with these spiky, strong roots that actually are growing in a really slow spiral down into the earth. And when they get down into that subsoil, and they can penetrate soils that other smaller roots can't penetrate, they get down in there, they're working really hard, sending out little tiny roots, and they're actually, with their microorganism partners, they're actually able to sequester micronutrients from the deeper soil, combine them with other elements, and bring them up into their top bodies in again, a bioavailable form. So now there's this really nutrient-rich top growth, and when that is eaten by an animal or an insect, or it falls onto the earth and decomposes, now those nutrients are available in the topsoil to other more tender plants that don't have that capacity to penetrate that hard, heavy soil. So they're bringing things that are very minute, trace elements, and they're concentrating them in their bodies and then offering them to the topsoil. So these are things like comfrey, burdock, California poppy, dandelions, chives, caraway, chicory, dock, chickweed, cloves, clovers, and thistle. So, and dandelion is on this list too. So a lot of things that we feel like we don't want in our gardens are actually responding to a need in the soil. And like the dandelion is here because it's able to sequester, calcium and potassium from the deep subsoil and bring it up and offer to the topsoil. And the thistles are doing the same thing, and the comfrey is doing the same thing. And when we come through and we just remove in the green waste bin, I don't want this one. It's going to seed all over the place, right? Now you're minding your soil and sending those nutrients away. So better if you can just put it in a compost pile, put it on your beds later. Even better if you can just sheet mulch over it, let it be where it is. It grew there because that place needed it. So let's leave it there. A little bit messier looking maybe, but we're embracing messy right now, right? Okay, what else do we have? We have insect attractors. These are plants that make little tiny flowers that are very attractive to mostly the parent insects of these predatory insects that eat the caterpillars and things. So there are these things called parasitic wasps. And the adults like teeny tiny flowers. They like to come in and get nectar from dill and cilantro or sunflowers or calendulas or yarrow or all these other plants with lots of like the buffet, right? Lots of teeny places to come get nectar. So these parasitic wasps, the adults eat that, and then they lay their eggs inside of caterpillars. Their eggs hatch out into little larvae. The larvae somehow knows which part of the caterpillar to leave for last, as it's eating it out from the inside, in order to not kill it prematurely. And this little larvae will eat the caterpillar out from the inside. It will then emerge on the skin of the caterpillar as a little teeny tiny pupa that looks like a miniature grain of rice. And then it will come out as the adult and go do this all over again. It's like Aliens, but for real. And so having these insect attractor plants brings in these parasitic wasps and other predatory insects that are doing a similar thing to keep the herbivorous plants from eating, herbivorous insects from eating all of our plants, right? Hi, you got my word? Oh, that's an A frame. Excellent. Okay, so those are insect attractors. They're also beautiful and you just provide a lot. You can see your honeybees and all your other stuff. And then grass suppressing bulbs, you know, daffodils, narcissus, iris, chives, lilies and bunch grasses, you know, things that just keep these annual, mostly European invasive grasses away. And, you know, why do we want to keep the grasses away? Grasses can be really beautiful, but they actually share the same zone in the soil that a lot of the fruit tree feeder roots are sharing. So there is, you know, a little bit more competition in that realm than usual. Although mostly what is happening all around us is not competition, it's all cooperation. And if we think we're seeing a competition, we're usually just not perceiving things quite right. We're seeing things through the lens that we've been seeing things through our whole lives, that we've been taught, the way we've been really indoctrinated to understand the world is this nature red in tooth and claw, right? Oh, that's getting all the nutrients, that's getting all the water, that's getting all the light, we have to remove it. Well, yeah, as stewards, we can reduce something that's kind of taking over to give other things a better opportunity. But really, everybody is sharing down underground. And the soil microorganisms, they are interested in having roots from as many different kinds of plants as possible. The soil microorganisms, their number one preferred food source is these exudates from plant roots, these secretions. And the more different kinds of plants you have, the more different kinds of soil microorganisms you'll have, and the healthier soil you'll have. So how does this all apply to your own food forest, your own backyard? Whatever you have going on there right now, you can pretty much just say all of these weeds, all of this, whatever it is, this is all good. This is all going to help jumpstart my whole system, help me create the conditions for life to exist, proliferate, enhance. And then you say, where can I dig a swale in order to initiate this process of earth healing and allowing the water to come in? On a slope, it's really easy, and we can talk about, if I have a moment, I can talk about that. On totally flat ground, you can just dig a trench to nowhere, or a little basin or something, just somewhere for the water to sink in. And if you do have like a height of standing water at a certain point during a storm, that's actually just more pressure to help the water penetrate the earth, right? And so temporary standing water, I encourage people not to worry about. Just observe what happens, you know. Insects will come, different things will come. It can be your own little nature experiment. And then over time, you'll see this whole system develop. And so you dig the swale, you plant some trees on the berms, you plant some of this understory, and then you kind of just let go. Like one of our principles in permaculture is relinquish power. You don't have to be in charge of the whole thing. You get it started and you stand back and watch and you do a little bit of stewarding. And then, you know, your health, your time, your resources, those are all going to determine how involved you can be. And even if all you can do is dig the swale and plant the tree, you've started something. You can walk away at that point. It might not look like tidy and pretty, but it's going to be doing its thing. So our involvement is really about our desired level of tidiness, not really about the success of the system, right? The planet can do all of this by itself with just us helping get it started. And it would do it, all of it, if we disappeared, it would do all of it by itself. It would just take so much longer. We have this opportunity. We have these opposable thumbs and these clever minds and all of these ideas, and even our machines can help us jumpstart the regeneration. The same machines that have caused all this damage, the same cows that have degraded thousands of acres of rangelands can be used in a different pattern in order to restore the rangelands. That's another story, but you can read about that in Judith Schwartz's first book, Cows Save the Planet. So all kinds of fun reading for you. But anyway, once you get this community established, all of these plants are feeding and protecting and supporting the fruit tree. The fruit tree is feeding us and feeding all of these plants as well with its exudates and its mulch that it's dropping and its fruits that it's feeding the wildlife and the insects and everything with. And then you have all of this amazing underground connection happening with the roots, where you can see, oh, these are good drawings I did. So here's a dandelion, and here's a comfrey, and here are some fava beans, and you can see a little bit of the interaction with the tree. And this is just like a mini little pattern that you can expand on, so you could have 20 of these all merged together if you have enough space in your backyard. And then instead of a fruit tree guild, you have the full-on food forest. And so this is what Sustainable Solano and the whole Backyard Venetian movement is really trying to bring to more and more people. And if you've got that little bug in your heart right now and you're like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, they have a whole application process where you can have this done for free, right? It's free. Where's Elena? The whole food forest thing, the homeowner just offers their home, right? And then the group comes and plants and everything, and it's free, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, but it's very few opportunities left, right? So
Right.
we encourage everyone to try it on your own by seeing these houses, by listening to our speakers. You guys are on your own.
So she's saying there's not that many opportunities for the organized food forest installation, but that with this, armed with this little bit of knowledge, you can go out and start this on your own.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and we want you to know our designers, that's why we're bringing the speakers, so get to know these people. It's not a nuclear science, it's possible to do for all of us. Laundry to landscape system is really do-it-yourself. Just with a little bit, but if you need help, all our designers have their businesses and they're willing to work here
Yeah.
too.
And it's a really fun project to do with friends. So maybe you just have a little book group and you're not, none of you are like gardeners or anything like that, but you have people, you could read this book, you could get excited, and you can just start small at somebody's house, at everybody's house, and just watch and observe, because really this whole design system of permaculture, it came into being in its form by observation, by people just noticing what nature was doing and saying, why is that happening like that? Why is this so healthy and this not healthy? What's different? What can I see? How, as I watch through a year, through storms, through dry, through wind, how do I understand what's happening here? And then how do I replicate that? And so this is something that all of us are totally capable of doing, even if you don't have a significant background in horticulture or planting or anything like that, just by using your intuition and your observation, and then, seeking the help of other people who you hear about in your community who are doing the same thing. So I hope that you feel excited and inspired and empowered, because this is what keeps me going in the world right now, with all of the other things that are happening that are so hard to even hear about, much less engage with healing or prevention or whatever. Like, this really keeps me going and brings me hope and brings a lot of other people hope too. So I hope you're excited. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.